For what, 2,500 years? Those words from the prophet Daniel have just hung there in history. They suggest a deep mystery, a message locked away, just waiting for the right moment to be understood. But what if that moment is right now? All right, today we are diving deep into one of the most famous and most debated prophecies in the entire Bible, the 70 weeks of Daniel. For centuries, pretty much everyone agreed on what it meant. But what if they were all wrong? There's a really complex theory out there that argues a couple of mistranslated Hebrew words have kept the prophecy's true meaning hidden this whole time. So we're going to unpack this theory step by step and see how it points to a radically different timeline for the future. So here's our roadmap. First, we're going to get our bearings with the traditional view, the one that's been the standard for centuries. Then, we'll dive into the two linguistic keys that this theory claims can finally unlock the whole thing. From there, we'll see how these keys create a totally new prophetic calendar, and we'll look at the so-called signs that are supposed to prove it's all being revealed now. And finally, we'll put all the pieces together to see the complete and frankly mind-bending timeline this interpretation puts forward. Okay, so before we can really appreciate how different this new theory is, we have to start with the foundation. We've got to understand the way this prophecy has been read for hundreds and hundreds of years because it's been the bedrock for how most people think about this stuff. You see, the traditional view of Daniel chapter 9 revolves around this idea of 70 weeks. Now, in prophecy speak, a week is often seen as 7 years. So you do the math, 70 times 7, and you get a 490-year timeline. For ages, scholars have linked this period directly to the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ in the first century. It seemed to fit so perfectly. For many, it's been case closed for almost 2,000 years. But this is where the interpretation we're looking at today just throws a giant wrench in the works. It all comes down to one really provocative question. What if the very building blocks of that 490-year timeline, the words themselves, are based on a simple misunderstanding of the original Hebrew? What if we've been reading the code wrong this entire time? And that brings us right to the heart of the argument. According to this theory, you can't crack Daniel's prophecy without two very specific keys. One is about language, and the other is about math. And together, they challenge everything we thought we knew. Now, before we even look at the words, we have to get our heads around the calendar this theory uses. It's not our calendar, it's the biblical Jubilee cycle. So think of it like this. You have 7 sets of 7 years, which gives you a 49-year cycle. That 50th year was the big one, the Jubilee, a time when all debts were canceled and land was returned. According to this new interpretation, this isn't just some old tradition. It's the master clock for God's entire prophetic plan. That 49-year pattern is absolutely crucial. All right, here is key number 1. And honestly, this is a huge one. It all centers on the Hebrew word shabuam. In just about every Bible you pick up, when Daniel 9 talks about 70 weeks, the word for weeks is shabuam. But this theory, put forth by researchers like C J Lovik, says that translation is a fundamental mistake. The claim is that shabuam isn't a period of time like weeks at all. Instead, it's just the number 70, and it's meant to be a multiplier. So check out the explosive implication of that. When the original Hebrew text basically says shaboam, shaboam, it's not some poetic way of saying 70 weeks. No, this interpretation argues it's a direct mathematical instruction. You multiply 70 by 70. Suddenly, the prophecy isn't about adding up 70 small chunks of time. It's about a massive multiplication. Now, key number 2 targets another word that was supposedly mistranslated. Later in the passage, there's a phrase that's usually translated as 62 weeks. Well, the word for 2 is believed to be the Hebrew word shenem. But here's the catch. This theory points out that shenem is used hundreds of times in the Old Testament, and almost every single time it means years. The argument is that translators only rendered it as 2 to make it fit the weeks model they already had in their heads. If they had just translated it as years, it would have been a huge clue that the entire prophecy should be calculated in years, not weeks of years. So, what happens when you take these two linguistic keys and you turn them in the lock? Well, that familiar 490-year prophecy doesn't just get a little bigger, it completely explodes in scale. This is the number we're all used to seeing, 490 years. It's a significant amount of time for sure, but it's a period that is neatly contained in ancient history. It's all in our rearview mirror. But with this new math, that number just transforms. 70 times 70 is 4,900 years. All of a sudden, we're dealing with a timeline that stretches from the very dawn of the nation of Israel and far into our future. A prophecy that would span not just one ancient empire, but all of them. This is the massive mathematical shift that changes everything. Okay, so how does this huge 4,900-year timeline actually work? Well, the theory says there are two prophetic clocks, and they're both running at the same time based on those 49-year Jubilee cycles. The first one is a massive 100 Jubilee cycle, which is exactly 4,900 years long. It supposedly kicks off way back in 1848 BC, when Israel first became a nation in Egypt, and it ends way out in the future in 3053 AD. But running inside that bigger timeline is a second, much more urgent clock. This one is 70 Jubilees long, which is 3,430 years. It starts from a different key event, 1406 BC, the year Israel finally entered the Promised Land. And if you do the math and run that clock forward from that date, it lands squarely on the year 2025. And that right there is the theory's most specific and startling claim. Which, of course, brings up a massive question. I mean, you're probably thinking it right now. If this is all correct and the math is so clear, why has it been hidden for thousands of years? Why are we only hearing about this now? Well, the theory finds its answer right back in the book of Daniel itself. You see, the argument is that the prophecy was designed to be sealed, like a time capsule. It's said that Daniel chapter 12 actually gives us a checklist of 7 specific global conditions, or markers, that would all be happening around the same time that the prophecy was finally meant to be unsealed. And the presence of these signs today is presented as the main evidence that now is the time for this new understanding to finally come to light. So let's quickly run through this checklist, because these 7 signs are crucial to the whole now is the time idea. First, the Archangel Michael would be supernaturally protecting the nation of Israel, a role this theory says became obvious after 1948. Second, the world would see a time of unprecedented trouble for Israel. Third and fourth are tied together. Out of that trouble, a remnant of Israel will be saved, and it's followed by a great resurrection of the dead. Fifth, the wise, the people who understand and share this message, will be glorified. Sixth is the lock on the time capsule itself. The book was sealed until this time. And finally, number 7, knowledge will be increased, with many running to and fro. Proponents say this is a dead ringer for our modern world of jets and the internet, the very technology that lets a theory like this spread across the globe in an instant. So let's say the linguistic keys are correct. Let's say the math really does point to 2025, and all 7 of those signs are flashing. What's supposed to happen next? Well, this interpretation doesn't just give us a date. It lays out a very specific final countdown. Okay, here it is, the entire sequence. The theory pinpoints the fall of 2025 as the start of a final 7-year period of tribulation, lasting exactly 2,520 days. Right at the halfway point, a peace deal involving Israel is supposed to be broken by a world leader known as the Antichrist. This intense period ends in the fall of 2032, with the prophesied second coming of Christ. After that, we get a 1,000-year kingdom here on a renewed earth, which lasts until 3032. And then finally, in 3053 AD, which is the endpoint of that massive 100 Jubilee cycle we talked about, the current universe is replaced by a new heaven and a new earth, wrapping up all of prophecy for good. All right, so let's just boil all of this down one last time. The core claim here is that Daniel's prophecy is actually 10 times longer than we thought, 4,900 years, not 490. This whole thing is supposedly unlocked by retranslating 2 key Hebrew words, Shabuim and Shenim, and by using the 49-year Jubilee cycle as the master calendar. This new math gives us a timeline that starts when Israel entered the Promised Land and points directly to the year 2025. The timing is then supposedly confirmed by 7 signs from Daniel 12, which kicks off a final 7-year countdown to a prophesied 1,000-year kingdom. So, in the end, what are we really looking at here? Does this incredibly complex web of linguistic arguments, historical dates, and Jubilee math actually represent an ancient code, hidden in plain sight and finally unsealed for our generation? Or is it a fascinating, compelling, but ultimately modern rereading of a sacred text, something shaped by our own unique moment in history? That's a question we can't answer for you, but it is certainly one worth thinking about.